Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take the sources you share with us and really distill them down to the insights, the surprising facts, and, the historical context that makes you well informed.
And today, we are undertaking I think, a really fascinating deep dive. We're looking at a collection of sources centered on Sikh philosophy and its history. We've been working with some excerpts from the latest issue of the Sikh Review.
That's right, Volume 73, Issue 9, which is dated for September 1st, 2025. And as you said, the visual anchor for this whole exploration is right there on the cover.
The Sridhar Sahib.
The breathtaking Sridhar Sahib, yeah, the Golden Temple in Amritsar. And that image, it sets the stage perfectly for tradition, for community, and for this profound spiritual aspiration we're going to talk about.
It really does. And the source material itself is, well, it's ambitious. Our goal today is kind of twofold.
Okay.
First, we want to extract the essential tenets of Sikh philosophy, specifically around the difference between, say, intellectual knowledge and genuine, transformative spiritual realization.
The book smarts versus the lived wisdom.
Exactly. And then second, we want to clarify the profound and I think often misinterpreted ideal that's encapsulated in the term Khalsa. We want to move beyond just seeing it as a political or ritualistic label and really try to understand the true universal meaning of the phrase Raj Karega Khalsa.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're going to be contrasting bookish knowledge with lived spiritual wisdom and defining sovereignty not as like owning land, but as a reign of universal, personal, and collective righteousness. That sounds like a pretty powerful challenge to a lot of modern thinking.
It is.
So let's start where the sources start, with this really fundamental spiritual imperative.
The deep dive kicks off right away by presenting this age-old theological puzzle. It's drawn from a meditation excerpt, a translation of a Shabad from the Guru Granth Sahib, SGGS 718.
Okay.
And it basically states that people are constantly debating. Some will claim that God is right here, near us, while others assert that God is infinitely far away, completely inaccessible.
And this is the quintessential philosophical argument, isn't it? I mean, it's the endless debate that occupies theologians and scholars in every major tradition.
Absolutely.
Where is the divine? Is it immanent right here with us, or is it transcendent way out there? But the source material, it doesn't try to answer that with more philosophy.
No, it does something much more interesting. It dismisses the argument itself using this really spectacular analogy.
And this analogy is, I have to say, one of the most memorable things from the entire source stack we looked at.
It really is. The Shabad declares that trying to reach any kind of consensus on the location of God through mere arguments is utterly impossible.
And the analogy is?
It's like a fish living in water trying to climb a palm tree.
The fish and the palm tree, I mean, that visual is just so rich. We need to pause and really analyze that. Why there's two specific things, a fish and a palm tree.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the futility of using intellectual wrangling for spiritual matters.
Yeah.
Just think about the fish for a second. It's completely immersed in its environment, in water, which you could say symbolizes lived reality, the context of divine presence. The fish is already in the truth.
Right. It's literally swimming in it.
Exactly. And yet it tries to resolve its fundamental reality by attempting to climb a palm tree.
And the palm tree represents what? Dryness, height, rigidity?
All of that. The palm tree symbolizes this sort of aloof, dry intellectualism, or maybe rigid dogma. It's high, which suggests a kind of arrogance or a distance from the lived reality of the world.
So by trying to climb that dry, rigid intellectual height to resolve a truth that is actually found in the fluid, humble depths of experience.
The fish, or the spiritual seeker, is attempting something that's completely outside its nature. You're arguing in vain about a location when the answer is found in the immersion itself.
So the core insight here is that you just can't resolve spiritual truths with abstract, useless arguments. If you're using logic and, intellectual firepower to try and force a consensus on something that is intrinsically experiential,
you're fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of the quest. You're using the wrong tool for the job.
And that leads to the next crucial observation in the text, which is what happens to the person who stops arguing and actually finds God?
The text makes it very clear. The person who has truly attained that realization becomes overwhelmingly humble. They don't feel the need to flaunt their knowledge.
That's the external mark of an internal transformation. If I have truly attained some kind of self-knowledge or spiritual truth, the motivation to engage in petty intellectual disputes about it just vanishes.
It's gone. The truth is lived, not debated.
And this realization, it naturally informs a critique of those who do spend their time endlessly debating, which is where Bhagat Namdev comes in.
Yes, a revered poet saint whose hymns are included in the Guru Granth Sahib. And he enters the discussion with a remarkably sharp observation about traditional scholars.
So what is Namdev's specific critique of these pandits or scholars?
He implies that these traditional scholars, the ones who dedicate their entire lives to discussing the Vedas, ancient religious scriptures, in incredible depth. He says they are often foolish if their method of seeking God is limited only to reading and interpreting those texts.
Wow, that is a fundamental challenge to religious institutionalism and dogma, isn't it? It's like you have the full map, the detailed itinerary, but you never actually step out of the lecture hall to take the journey yourself.
That's a perfect way to put it. They confuse the description of the experience with the experience itself.
And the core message is that true knowledge of God comes experientially.
Through meditation, service, a profound personal realization. It doesn't come from acquired bookish information. And the translation provides this really powerful analytical distinction here. It says bookish information needs to be substantiated.
Okay, let's pull on that thread. The concept of knowledge needing substantiation is fascinating, and it feels incredibly relevant to our current information age.
Well, when knowledge is just academic or textual, it relies on external validation, right?
It needs footnotes.
It needs footnotes, peer review, consensus, or the authority of the text itself to prove its reality. It needs to be substantiated by some kind of external evidence or authority. Whereas personal, internal, experiential knowledge, the knowledge you gain through Simran, through meditation, and finding the divine within, it's self-authenticating.
It doesn't need external proof.
It doesn't need a consensus of scholars or the backing of a tradition to confirm its reality. It's a lived, integrated, undeniable truth for the person who holds it. The quiet confidence of the truly humble replaces the argumentative volume of the intellectually knowledgeable.
And this speaks so deeply to the challenge we face today. We are constantly consuming data, articles, podcasts. We think we're informed. But how much of that data do we truly substantiate with our own actions and reflections and experiences? It feels like we've become experts at climbing that dry intellectual palm tree of data without ever truly immersing ourselves in the water of integrated, applied knowledge.
The ancient dilemma is the original big data problem, in a way. Are you just aggregating information, or are you transforming that information into wisdom that actually dictates your actions?
Yeah.
And this contrast between internal realization and external argumentation, it's the necessary foundation for the next stage of our deep dive, which is how does this selfless, humble individual scale up to form a collective identity that's dedicated to righteousness?
And that is the ideal of the Khalsa.
That is the ideal of the Khalsa.
So if true spiritual realization leads to personal humility and a rejection of useless arguments, how do you scale that selfless individual ideal up to form a collective identity? That's where the editorial from the SikhReview comes in, focusing on restoring the spirit of a timeless vision. And the entire discussion really hedges on one word.
Khalsa.
Khalsa.
Yes, and we need to move beyond just a simple translation here.
Yeah.
The editorial defines the Khalsa not merely as a baptized community, but as a profound spiritual ideal. And we have to start with the etymology because it carries so much spiritual weight.
The source says that Khalsa originates from the Arabic word khalis. What does that root word convey?
Well, khalis literally means pure, unadulterated, or unsullied. But historically, and this is key, particularly in the context of the Mughal administration during which this concept evolved.
Right.
Khalis referred to the lands or property that were held directly by the sovereign, the crown land. There was no intermediary official or feudal lord to collect taxes or administer the territory. It was direct.
Okay, so that's where the power comes from. If the Khalsa is Khalis, they are direct to the divine sovereign. No intermediary needed.
Exactly. That etymological nuance is absolutely critical. The Khalsa ideal signifies a community that is pure in its allegiance. Its loyalty and its accountability are direct to the divine will, bypassing earthly, political, or even priestly intermediaries.
Which reinforces the critique of the pandit we just talked about. The Khalsa is meant to be spiritually self-sufficient.
That's right. And this purity, it translates into very specific moral qualities mentioned in the editorial.
Which are purity, moral courage, and selfless service. It's an embodiment of those three things, not just a label you wear.
It's an aspirational state of being. And when Guru Gobind Singh Ji formally bestowed this title, the intent was to create a community that was composed of individuals who lived in total alignment with this divine will.
So let's focus on the practical outcome of that alignment. The members were meant to be free from fear and free from malice. Why are those two qualities, freedom from fear and malice, why are they the hallmarks of spiritual sovereignty?
Well, if you are truly aligned with the divine sovereign and you're committed to justice and righteousness, you operate from a position of moral strength.
Okay.
You have no need to fear temporary earthly power because your ultimate loyalty is, well, it's elsewhere. And you fear no consequences when you're standing for truth.
And the malice part.
Conversely, if you are truly dedicated to selfless service and compassion, you have no room for malice or hatred toward others. It's the highest form of self-governance, applied immediately to your own internal emotional state.
Living without fear or malice, that really is the definition of a spiritually sovereign individual. And this brings us directly to the concept that so often gets politicized, Raj Karega Khalsa.
Yes, the editorial sets this up as the ultimate fulfillment of the vision. The phrase Raj Karega Khalsa first emerged linked to Guru Gobind Singh Ji's vision for a spiritually sovereign community.
And we have to emphasize that first word. Spiritually.
Absolutely. This community was intended to exercise moral authority. And the editorial is very insistent on this point. This was not intended to mean territorial domination.
So the sovereignty is internal.
It's internal, it's moral, it's based on conduct, and it applies universally to all aspects of life. It's not external, focused on land borders and political hierarchy. That distinction is really the beating heart of this entire deep dive.
So if we summarize this section, the Khalsa is an ideal built on direct purity and divine alignment. And it's designed to establish moral authority. The purity of the purpose defines the power of the execution, which means we need to go deeper into defining that authority, that Raj.
When we dissect Raj Karega Khalsa, everything, and I mean everything, hinges on how we interpret that first word, Raj.
Which translates to reign or rule.
Right. And the editorial clearly defines the true scope of it. It is the reign of righteousness. It's an ethical mandate guided by the universal principles of justice, compassion, and equality.
And the text makes this critical point that this rule applies universally, whether the governance is personal or collective. That is the intellectual pivot we really need to dwell on.
This is the defining insight that ties it all back to the individual's spiritual journey. The concept of Raj demands that every Khalsa exercise self-governance.
Self-governance.
Yes. If you govern your own life, your conduct, your consumption, your interactions based on justice, compassion, and equality, then you are actively participating in the reign of righteousness.
Which means the spiritual kingdom is built not by armies, but by the moral conduct of every single participant. So, for instance, if Raj is the reign of righteousness, it means a Khalsa business owner has to adhere to justice and equality in their pricing and hiring.
That's their personal governance.
Just as much as a Khalsa running a political office or a community aid organization, which is the collective governance.
It democratizes the kingdom. The power isn't held by some central authority. It is distributed equally among all who commit to the ideal. The temporal world, the Miri, is now obligated to serve the ethical mandate, the Puri.
But the editorial sounds a warning. It notes that this expansive universal meaning is often lost today. What are the specific dangers of misinterpretation that the source highlights, and why has this confusion happened historically?
The editorial points out two primary pitfalls. First, the phrase has been, and I'm quoting, relegated to ritual recitation without deeper reflection.
So it becomes a comfortable mantra.
Exactly. It's repeated mindlessly, and it loses its power to challenge or transform behavior. It turns into a kind of spiritual decoration rather than a moral imperative.
And the second, more dangerous pitfall.
It has been politicized or interpreted in narrow nationalist terms. This happened particularly during periods of intense political struggle, first against the later Mughal state and then during the British Raj.
Times when the community was facing existential threats.
Right. And in those times, focusing on a literal territorial sovereignty became a rallying cry for survival. It's understandable.
So historical necessity kind of warped the spiritual ideal.
Precisely. The universal relevance and scope of the Khalsa ideal, which is justice for all humanity, it gets diminished. If you reduce it to a narrow struggle for territorial control, you lose the foundational ethical commitment laid down by the gurus.
You transform a universal concept into a localized political demand.
Yes. And the editorial's title, Restoring the Spirit, is a call to discard that narrow political lens and embrace the original expansive universal spiritual mission.
To really understand the power of that original mission, we have to put it in historical context. I mean, the Khalsa didn't just emerge in a vacuum. It was the culmination of over 200 years of spiritual and political development.
That's right.
Let's trace that historical evolution starting at the very foundation laid by Guru Nanak Dev Ji.
Guru Nanak Dev Ji established the foundational rejection of the existing social order. He rejected caste hierarchies entirely. He rejected ritualism as a substitute for genuine faith, and he rejected tyranny in all its forms, whether it was political or religious.
How radical was that at the time? I mean, in a world where caste defined every single social interaction and political tyranny was the norm, what was the practical implication of affirming the oneness of humanity?
It was profoundly revolutionary. By affirming the oneness of humanity and the sovereignty of divine truth, Guru Nanak established a community that was, by its very definition, borderless and universal in his mission.
So you can't build a narrow political state.
You can't. Not if your spiritual foundation rejects caste and affirms equality for everyone, regardless of their background or gender. The ideal demanded universal outreach from the very start.
And how did that radical seed grow through the subsequent gurus? How did that lead up to this critical moment of integration?
The need to integrate spiritual wisdom with temporal action became more and more apparent as the community faced escalating persecution. And this culminated in Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji's establishment of the Miri Piri doctrine.
Okay, we need to spend some serious time here. Miri Piri is often simplified. Explain what this doctrine really means and why it was created.
The doctrine arose directly after the martyrdom of Guru Arjan Dev Ji. It was a recognition that, spiritual truth alone wasn't sufficient protection against oppressive temporal power.
Right.
So Miri refers to the temporal or political sword, the responsibility to engage with the world, defend the community, and administer justice. And Piri refers to the spiritual sword, the wisdom, the mysticism, the divine guidance.
So it's not a separation of church and state, it's an integration, but with a clear hierarchy.
Precisely. They are two swords worn simultaneously, symbolizing this balanced integration of, you could say, saintliness and soldiership. But crucially, the Piri, the spiritual wisdom and ethics, must always govern the Miri, the temporal power.
So the power to rule the Miri is only legitimate if it's exercised under the unwavering ethical restraint of spiritual wisdom, the Piri.
Yes. The idea is that the spiritual leader has to be willing to stand up to injustice, and the temporal leader must be guided by profound ethics.
This integrated approach was the necessary prerequisite for what happened in 1699. This integration meant that when Guru Gobind Singh Ji formally created the Khalsa, it wasn't a move away from spiritual principles.
No, it was the ultimate application of those principles into a mandated social and political structure.
And in 1699, the creation of the Khalsa gave this spiritual temporal vision a concrete collective form. The most radical, socially transformative moment was the selection of the Panj Pierre, the 5 beloved ones.
It really was.
Given the social fabric of the time, how radical was it, practically speaking, to select 5 men from dramatically different castes, regions, and professions?
It was an act of profound social surgery. In a society that was completely defined by birthright and rigid hierarchy, this selection transcended caste, it transcended social divisions, regional barriers. It was a definitive public rejection of social hierarchy as the basis for community membership.
So the only requirement was?
Total unquestioning commitment to the moral and spiritual ideal. The Khalsa was defined purely by moral conduct and spiritual commitment, not by the accident of birth.
And the ultimate purpose that flows from this dual identity, this moral commitment, was specifically not conquest for power's sake.
The editorial states this very clearly. The mission of the Khalsa was the protection of righteousness, the defense of the oppressed, and the service of all humanity. That universal service mandate is the true expression of Raj Karega Khalsa.
A reign of righteousness that defends the weak and upholds justice everywhere.
Everywhere. Without requiring a flag or a specific political boundary. The moral authority reigns supreme.
So the Raj isn't about wielding a territorial crown. It's about wielding moral authority based on Piri, the spiritual sword, and ensuring that any Miri, any temporal action, is constrained by universal justice and compassion.
And that again links us right back to Section 1. The only person who is capable of truly serving that mission is the one who has attained that experiential knowledge, that humility, and is free from fear and malice. It's a seamless integration of the individual's internal life and the community's external mission.
It's one thing to define a timeless vision rooted in history. It's a whole other thing to maintain that vision in a modern, rapidly changing, and globally dispersed community. And we see in the surrounding source material this fascinating and incredibly structured ecosystem that's designed to keep these philosophical and historical ideals alive through active propagation.
And that is the ultimate test of any timeless vision, isn't it? Does it build the infrastructure to teach its fundamentals to the next generation? The efforts detailed in these sources show an intense, organized focus on passing down these core tenets.
And ensuring that the why, the philosophy, the universal mandate, is never lost in just ritual or nationalism.
Exactly.
So let's look at the foundational educational resources, specifically the ones provided by Hemkund Books. What is their strategy for early education?
The strategy is comprehensive, and it's very age-appropriate. They're starting at the earliest possible phase of learning. They offer activity books 0 and 0+ van, explicitly designed for nursery and KG children.
So the objective isn't complex philosophy at that point?
Not at all. It's about foundational narrative and familiarity.
And what foundational elements are they focusing on for those very young learners?
They cover the basic building blocks, the Sikh gurus, the significance of major shrines, the meaning of the symbols like the khanda and the Karaski personages, central practices, and major festivals.
So by starting with symbols and narratives, they're ensuring that the external markers of the faith are immediately connected to the stories and the foundational figures. It lays the groundwork for later ethical understanding.
That's right. And their structured historical curriculum carries this forward into the intermediate years. They offer the Stories from Sikh History series, which spans books 1 through 6. This is essential for providing the context needed to understand those radical shifts we talk about, like Miri Piri.
It's a detailed chronological history, then.
Very detailed. Book 1 starts with Guru Nanak Dev Ji's life and travels, establishing that universal foundation. Then they track the narrative through the successive gurus, detail the events leading up to the Khalsa formation, cover subsequent Sikh heroes like Banda Bahadur.
And critically, they trace the community's journey right up to the modern era.
They do, covering events around 1947 in Book 6.
This kind of detailed curriculum ensures that the historical context, the socio-political pressures that necessitated the Khalsa and the Miri Piri doctrine, is fully understood. It prevents the vision from being reduced to a static myth.
Exactly. It shows the evolution of the ideal under duress. But these educational efforts, they aren't just confined locally. The source material also highlights a significant global cultural initiative.
Led by the Sikh Cultural Center and the SikhReview?
Yes, centered around the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev Ji.
And this initiative speaks directly to that universal mandate we were just talking about in Section 3. What was the core initiative here?
They sponsored a large-scale project which resulted in a beautiful pictorial biography titled Nanak the Guru. And the target wasn't just Sikh children. It was aimed at educating children worldwide about Guru Nanak's foundational teachings.
It's an act of cultural diplomacy.
It is, translating spiritual ideals into universally accessible materials.
Let's just reiterate the core ideology that they sought to disseminate globally, because it really underpins this entire deep dive.
The book focused on Guru Nanak Dev Ji's ideology, the oneness of God, the absolute equality of all humans regardless of caste, creed, or gender, and the critical importance of earning an honest living, sharing one's earnings with others, which is Vanchako, and meditating on the divine name Nam Japna for spiritual liberation.
Earning honestly, sharing, and meditating, that is the integrated Miri Piri approach applied to daily life, isn't it?
It is. Temporal responsibility linked directly to spiritual wisdom.
But the truly astounding part, which highlights the global reach, is just the sheer number of languages this biography was published in.
The publication list is a testament to the community's commitment to universality. I mean, beyond Punjabi, Hindi, and English, the book was also published in several South Indian languages like Telugu, Tamil, and Marathi, and even international languages.
Like Oriya, Spanish, and German?
Spanish and German.
They're publishing in Spanish and German, and then distributing these globally free of cost, sponsored by philanthropists, that transforms a community publishing effort into a global outreach initiative.
It does. It ensures that the message of human equality and spiritual universalism reaches children far outside the traditional cultural boundaries.
It is the active propagation of the reign of righteousness, demonstrating that the Khalsa's mandate is global, not national.
They're using the temporal tools of distribution and fundraising, the Miri, to spread the spiritual message of equality and non-duality, the Piri.
And finally, we see that this ecosystem also supports the more sophisticated spiritual seeker. What philosophical literature does the Adam Science Trust offer for those who are ready to delve deeper than the historical narrative?
Well, organizations like the Adam Science Trust provide the methodology for that personal realization. Their publishing list, which is also available in multiple languages, includes these deep philosophical texts that focus on spiritual practice.
Things like Banginama, the name divine, a panacea for all the ills,
The Power of Prayer, and Celestial Joy of Simran.
These titles clearly focus on the mechanisms of achieving that personal experiential knowledge that Namdev championed in our very first section.
They are the tools for turning that bookish knowledge into self-substantiating realization.
So it's a complete, integrated system.
It is. You have foundational history for the young, global outreach for universal inclusion, and deep philosophical texts for the sustained spiritual journey. It ensures the Khalsa ideal remains active, integrated, and continually nourished by both history and personal experience across all ages and across the world.
It's the infrastructure you would need to support an ideal that's defined by purity, humility, and active universal service.
So let's try to synthesize the three major pillars we've uncovered in this deep dive into the excerpts from the SikhReview.
Okay, first, we learned about the necessity of experiential spirituality, and that was perfectly symbolized by the futility of the fish trying to climb the palm tree.
Right.
True realization bypasses all that useless intellectual wrangling and leads directly to humility, distinguishing itself from the acquired bookish information that always needs external substantiation.
Second, we define the Khalsa as a profound spiritual ideal. We talked about Khalas, meaning purity, and that direct allegiance to the divine sovereign. It embodies moral courage and selfless service.
It's a community aligned with divine will, whose members strive to be free from fear and malice.
And most critically, we understood the core meaning of Raj Karega Khalsa. The Raj, or the reign, is the universal reign of righteousness, guided by justice, compassion, and equality.
It is a commitment to moral authority and universal service, applied equally and non-negotiably to your own personal self-governance and the community's collective actions. And it deliberately avoids being reduced to narrow territorial or nationalist goals.
And finally, we saw how this vision is actively maintained through a robust global ecosystem of education and publishing. This ensures that the historical context of the Miri Piri doctrine, that integration of the temporal and the spiritual, is taught universally.
It provides both the narrative and the methodology for continuous application. And all of this circles right back to that tension Namdev pointed out.
The difference between knowledge you simply consume and knowledge you fully realize and integrate. And that raises an important final question for you, the listener, to take away. If the ultimate Raj of the Khalsa is defined as personal and collective governance based on justice and compassion, what practical steps might you take to ensure your own daily decisions in your career, your family, your consumption habits reflect this principle of moral authority?
It's a direct challenge, really, a challenge to move from intellectual consumption, the bookish knowledge we've discussed, into applied, integrated experience. How do you stop trying to climb the dry palm tree of debate and just simply immerse yourself in the water of lived truth?
Because the goal is always to integrate that temporal responsibility with that fundamental spiritual wisdom. That is the timeless vision that the community works so diligently to preserve.
A profound and challenging thought to mull over. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the timeless vision of the Khalsa. Keep exploring, keep integrating that knowledge, and we'll catch you next time.